and all U.S. troops will be out of Iraq by the end of next year. At the same time, the President has refocused the military mission in Afghanistan, targeting the Taliban insurgency and protecting the Afghan people, increasing training of Afghan security forces, and beginning the transfer of responsibility to those forces in summer 2011 so that American forces can begin to come home. Today, the core of al-Qaeda, led by Osama bin Laden, is seriously damaged, bloodied, and hunkered down in the tribal areas along the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan. We've taken out key leaders and made it harder for them to move, to raise money, recruit, train, and plot their bloody attacks. We've disrupted many more plots and saved many more lives than the American public or the press will ever know. Nevertheless, al-Qaeda remains adaptive and highly resilient, with a web of affiliates distributed throughout the world in places like Yemen, where al-Qaeda and the Arabian Peninsula took credit for the failed attack over Detroit, in Somalia and East Africa, the Sahel and North Africa, in South Asia and in Southeast Asia. So in partnership with countries around the world, we're using every tool in our toolbox to protect our country and our citizens, going after those murderers wherever they plot and train, sharing intelligence, and building the capacity of partners like Yemen to defend themselves, disrupting the financing that fuels terrorism, and working with law enforcement. At the same time, we recognize that there is no military solution to the second and larger challenge we face of violent extremism generally. This includes those upstream factors, the political and economic causes and conditions that help to fuel hatred and violence, including loss of faith in political systems to improve daily life and the vulnerability of young minds to predators like gangs and terrorist recruiters. And while poverty and lack of opportunity do not cause terrorism, it is obvious that the lack of education, of basic human services, and hope for the future make vulnerable populations more susceptible to ideologies of violence and death. Ultimately, these challenges require political and economic solutions. So in Afghanistan, we're investing in leaders who combat corruption, promote good governance, and improve basic services, including education and health. Across the border, we're partnering with the Pakistani people, investing $1.5 billion every year for 5 years to promote economic development and strengthen democratic institutions. And finally, we are doing everything in our power to protect our homeland. And just as Muslim Americans serve at every level of government, local, state, and federal, to keep our country safe, let's never forget that Muslim American citizens, you and your organizations, help keep our nation safe as well. This, too, is frequently lost in the hysteria and fear-mongering that often surrounds national security discussions. In the aftermath of the tragic murder of 13 Americans on an Army base in Texas, Muslim American organizations roundly condemned such senseless violence and, in fact, reached out to help and support the family of those victims. We read about arrests, such as the Lackawanna 6 in Buffalo, but forget that it was Muslim Americans, community members, religious leaders who helped bring such plots to the attention of authorities. We read about the cases, such as Somali Americans from Minnesota returning to fight in Somalia, and 5 Virginia men who went to Pakistan seeking out militancy. But let's not forget that it was concerned parents and families worried for their loved ones who frequently alerted authorities. In other words, keeping our country safe and protecting our sons and daughters from hateful ideologies demands trust and cooperation. Over the years, organizations represented here today have worked closely with our government in this regard. Going forward, I would suggest that several key principles can guide us as we meet our responsibilities to each other. First, and I believe foremost, government must fulfill its responsibilities, including protecting the rights and civil liberties of all Americans. For the President, who worked as a civil rights lawyer and as a professor of constitutional law, this is not some policy choice to be debated. These are core values and laws that must be upheld. We must remember what we're fighting for. As the President noted in his State of the Union address, the Civil Rights Division at the Justice Department has returned to its founding mission, protecting civil rights and prosecuting violations. This includes the rights of Muslims, Arabs, Sikh, and South Asian Americans. For the burning of a mosque in Tennessee, several individuals will spend many years in prison. Across the country, the Justice Department has gone to court to protect the right of girls and women to wear the hijab to both school and work. And I can assure you today, the Obama administration will vigorously enforce new hate crime laws. Because the United States of America, no one should ever have to hide their faith out of fear. Second, your government must listen to you. Security policies and procedures cannot be formulated in a vacuum. They must reflect the realities of the world in which they will be implemented. Law enforcement cannot lose sight of the people that it is sworn to protect and to serve. We may not always see eye to eye, and I'm sure we will have differences as we discuss these issues today. These are very difficult and complex issues, though. And frankly, we within the government struggle with them on a daily basis. They do not lend themselves to easy answers. And at times, we are unfortunately forced to make some painful decisions that we would not make under ordinary circumstances. But on behalf of President Obama, on behalf of this administration, I can promise you this. In every discussion, in every decision, civil rights and civil liberties are always a priority. For example, in the wake of the attempted attack over Detroit, we strengthened our no-fly list, focusing on those who might do us harm, not those who don't. From the President on down, we are doing everything in our power to protect our national security and civil liberties, as we do not believe we need to make a choice between the two, and we will continue to optimize both our security and our civil liberties. Third, even as we listen and work together, we cannot securitize the relationship between the government and the American people. Not only cannot, but we should not. The relationship between the government and millions of Muslim, Arab, Sikh, and South Asian Americans and your government must not be defined by the threat of violent extremism. That is exactly what the terrorists want, and it would risk reinforcing the dangerous notion that your communities and your government are somehow in conflict when in not we are fellow citizens facing a common threat and need to find common solutions. Fourth, our work together must respect the proper roles of government and community. Government, law enforcement, and counterterrorism at the local, state, and federal levels should focus on keeping our country safe by preventing and prosecuting illegal behavior, including terrorist activities. And as experience has shown us, this is most effective when done in partnership with affected communities, because you know your communities best. The separate task of countering radical ideologies, the beliefs and attitudes that can lead to violence, must be led by families and communities, including your organizations. Government can play a supporting role, as is the Department of Homeland Security, in partnership with some of your organizations. But communities must take the lead. I commend your efforts to reach vulnerable individuals, especially young people, through religious education, social programs, and the Internet and social networking sites. But I want to say a word about the Internet. Just like gangs and drug dealers have infiltrated our neighborhoods and our parks and our playgrounds, so too have violent extremists and terrorists penetrated our cyber domain to ply their evil and sinful trade. Our communities must be vigilant for those cyber activities and defeat the efforts of those who would seek to do us harm. Finally, there is the principle that can guide each and every one of us, regardless of our faith, that we never forget the core values of diversity and tolerance and trust that define all of us as Americans. Each of us in our own lives has many identities. I am at once a son, a husband, a father, a Virginian, a Catholic, a public servant. As students, you are at once a son or a daughter or a brother or a sister, a Muslim, a student. Each of us, at times, may struggle with our different identities. I know I do. Others may try to get us to focus narrowly on the identities that seem to separate us. But we can never lose sight of the identities that unite us. We are all Americans, and therefore we all share a common purpose. We are a nation of faith, founded by men and women who came here to escape religious persecution, and have since been joined by believers of every faith. We are a nation of liberty, dedicated to the proposition that all men and women are created equal. Just as I am the son of an immigrant, we are a nation of immigrants, constantly renewed and strengthened by new arrivals from every country and culture every day. We are a nation of progress, where rights and justice have been expanded when we come together across color, creed, and faith to demand change. As the President said in Cairo, there are those who say that Muslims and non-Muslims are somehow fated to disagree. That as individuals we must somehow choose among our many identities. That different civilizations are doomed to clash. Of course, that myth is belied by more than 200 years of American history and American success.